Have you ever wondered why society treats solitude as something to be pitied, when it might actually be one of your greatest strengths? There's a quiet revolution happening among seniors who choose to live alone, not out of loneliness, but out of wisdom. These remarkable individuals have discovered something profound that challenges everything we've been told about aging and companionship. They've learned that solitude isn't the absence of connection, it's the presence of deep, meaningful engagement with life itself. In a world that constantly demands your attention and energy, choosing solitude becomes an act of courage and self-respect. Your golden years might just be the perfect time to embrace this powerful choice. The prevailing narrative tells you that aging alone is tragic, that you should fear the quiet moments and fill every space with noise and company. Society whispers that if you're not surrounded by people, you're somehow failing at life's final chapter. But what if this narrative is not only wrong, but actively harmful to your well-being? What if the very thing you've been taught to avoid could become your greatest source of strength and fulfillment? The pressure to conform to social expectations about how you should age can rob you of discovering your own authentic path. When you release yourself from these false obligations, you open the door to extraordinary personal growth. Today, you're going to discover something that will shift your entire perspective on what it means to age with dignity and purpose. We're exploring the unique strengths that emerge when seniors choose solitude not as a last resort, but as a deliberate, empowering lifestyle. These aren't the skills of hermits or recluses, but the refined abilities of individuals who have learned to thrive in their own company. You'll see how choosing solitude can sharpen your creativity, deepen your self-reliance, and connect you more profoundly to the world around you. This isn't about isolating yourself from life. It's about engaging with it on your own terms. These strengths don't develop by accident. They emerge through intentional choices and mindful living. The people you're about to meet have discovered something remarkable about the art of living alone. They've transformed what others see as limitation into liberation, what others call loneliness into purposeful solitude. Their stories will show you that there's nothing sad or diminished about choosing to spend your later years in your own thoughtful company. Instead, you'll witness how this choice can lead to extraordinary depth, creativity, and inner peace. These individuals haven't withdrawn from the world. They've simply found a different way to engage with it. Their wisdom comes not from avoiding life's challenges, but from facing them with the clarity that only comes from deep self-knowledge. Through their examples, you'll learn practical ways to cultivate these same strengths in your own life, whether you're currently living alone or simply seeking to appreciate the value of solitude. You'll discover how to transform quiet moments from something to endure into something to celebrate. Most importantly, you'll understand that choosing solitude is not about giving up on connection. It's about choosing the deepest connection of all, the one with yourself. This journey will challenge you to reconsider everything you thought you knew about aging, independence, and what it truly means to live a fulfilling life. By the end, you'll see solitude not as something to fear, but as a powerful tool for creating the life you've always wanted to live. To illustrate this, let me tell you a story about a man who discovered these truths in the most unlikely of places. On the rugged cliffs of a remote coastal village, where the Atlantic crashes endlessly against weathered rocks, lived a 76-year-old man named Michael. His cottage, built with his own weathered hands decades ago, perched precariously above the churning sea as if it had grown from the very stones of the cliff face. The salt air had worn the wooden shingles to a silvery grey, and the windows, though small, captured every shift of light across the water's surface. Michael had not always lived this way. For most of his working life, he had been a master shipwright, his hands crafting vessels that carried fishermen and merchants across these same waters. His workshop had once buzzed with activity, filled with the sounds of saws and hammers, the voices of apprentices, and the satisfaction of creating something both beautiful and functional. But as the years passed and the demand for handcrafted boats diminished, Michael found himself facing a choice that many people his age encounter: adapt to a world that seemed to have less need for his particular skills, or find a different way to live entirely. If you found value in what we're exploring today, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more wisdom on aging with purpose and dignity. The morning mist rolled in from the ocean as Michael stepped out of his cottage, his daily routine as predictable as the tides themselves. He had chosen this solitary life not from bitterness or defeat, but from a deep understanding that his greatest work might still lie ahead. In the silence of his clifftop sanctuary, surrounded only by the sounds of wind and waves, he had begun to discover strengths he never knew he possessed. What Michael had discovered in his years of chosen solitude was something remarkable, a collection of abilities that had emerged not despite his isolation, but because of it. As he walked toward his workshop that morning, the first of these strengths was already at work. His precision craftsmanship had evolved far beyond anything he had achieved during his shipbuilding days. Without the pressure of deadlines or the demands of clients, Michael's hands had found a new kind of freedom. The workshop, once filled with the massive frames of fishing boats, now housed an entirely different kind of creation. Scattered across weathered workbenches were pieces of driftwood in various stages of transformation, some barely touched by his tools, others nearly complete sculptures that seemed to capture the very essence of the sea itself. Each morning, Michael would walk the shoreline below his cottage, collecting fragments that the ocean had polished and shaped. What others saw as debris, he recognized as raw material for art. His latest creation sat prominently on the central workbench, a sculpture carved from a piece of oak that had once been part of a ship's mast, weathered by decades at sea before washing ashore. Under Michael's patient hands, it had become a representation of a whale's tail breaking the surface, frozen in that moment of power and grace. Every curve had been carved with meticulous attention, every surface smoothed to perfection. The work had taken him 3 months to complete, not because he lacked skill, but because perfection required time, and time was something he now possessed in abundance. This transformation from functional craftsmanship to artistic expression revealed something profound about the nature of precision work in solitude. Without external pressures, without the need to compromise or hurry, Michael's hands had rediscovered their truest potential. Each tool stroke was deliberate, each decision considered from every angle. The sculptures he created were not just objects, they were meditations carved in wood, embodiments of patience and careful thought. The second strength that solitude had cultivated in Michael was his meditative routine, and it began each day before dawn. As the first hint of light touched the horizon, he would make his way down the narrow path carved into the cliff face to where his small skiff waited. This daily ritual had nothing to do with necessity and everything to do with centering his mind and spirit for the day ahead. The skiff itself was a testament to his earlier craftsmanship, a simple, elegant vessel designed for one person and built to handle the coastal waters with grace. As Michael pushed off from the small dock and began to row, the rhythm of the oars cutting through the water became a form of moving meditation. Each stroke was measured, deliberate, connecting him physically to the sea that had shaped his entire life. During these morning excursions, Michael would row along the coastline, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 2, depending on the weather and his inner inclinations. He wasn't searching for anything in particular, yet he was always finding pieces of driftwood for his sculptures, interesting shells, or simply moments of perfect stillness when the water became mirror calm and the sky reflected perfectly on its surface. The meditative quality of these rows had taught Michael something valuable about the relationship between physical activity and mental clarity. The repetitive motion of rowing, combined with the rhythmic sound of water against the hull, created a natural state of mindfulness. His thoughts would settle like sediment in still water, leaving his mind clear and focused for the day's work. Ahead, what made this routine particularly powerful was its consistency. Regardless of weather, mood, or physical discomfort, Michael maintained this practice. Through storms, he would adjust his route, but never skip the ritual entirely. Through calm days, he would extend his journey to explore hidden coves and observe seabirds. This unwavering commitment to his morning meditation had created a foundation of mental stability that no external circumstance could shake. The third strength that had emerged from Michael's solitary life was his extraordinary environmental attunement. Living alone on the cliff had stripped away the distractions of human conversation and social obligation, allowing him to develop an almost supernatural sensitivity to the natural world around him. He could predict weather changes hours before they arrived, sensing shifts in air pressure through subtle changes in bird behavior and wind patterns. This morning, as he rowed back towards shore, Michael noticed the gulls flying lower than usual, their calls taking on a different pitch. The waves had a particular quality to their rhythm that spoke of a storm system still a day away. Most people would have missed these signs entirely. But solitude had taught him to read the language of his environment with the fluency of a native speaker. Back at his cottage, Michael moved through his morning preparations with the easy confidence of someone who had learned to anticipate nature's moods. He brought in extra firewood, secured loose items around his property, and checked the lashings on his skiff. These weren't the frantic preparations of someone caught off guard, but the methodical actions of a person who had learned to live in harmony with natural cycles. This environmental awareness extended beyond weather prediction into a deeper understanding of seasonal rhythms and ecological relationships. Michael knew when the first spring flowers would bloom on the clifftop, when certain fish would run close to shore, when the best driftwood would wash up after winter storms. His solitary life had made him part of the natural calendar in a way that few people ever experience. The fourth strength that solitude had cultivated was Michael's complete self-reliance. Every aspect of his daily life required skills that he had either possessed or had learned to develop during his years alone. When the cottage roof needed repair after a particularly fierce storm, Michael climbed up with his tools and fixed it himself. When his water pump failed, he diagnosed the problem and crafted a replacement part in his workshop. When his small vegetable garden needed protection from salt spray, he designed and built a windscreen from driftwood and salvaged canvas. This self-reliance wasn't born from stubbornness or a desire to prove anything to anyone. Instead, it emerged naturally from the practical necessities of living alone in a remote location. Each problem solved, each skill mastered, each challenge overcome had added another layer to his confidence and competence. The man who had once relied on apprentices and suppliers for many aspects of his work had become entirely self-sufficient. What made Michael's self-reliance particularly remarkable was how it had evolved beyond mere survival skills into a form of creative problem-solving. When he needed a new handle for an old chisel, he didn't simply carve a replacement. He designed one that improved upon the original, fitting his hand perfectly and providing better leverage. When his garden needed better drainage, he didn't just dig trenches. He created a system that collected rainwater for dry spells while preventing erosion. This comprehensive self-reliance had given Michael something invaluable: the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you can handle whatever life presents. There was no anxiety about depending on others, no worry about what would happen if help wasn't available. He had become his own most reliable resource. The fifth strength that had flowered in Michael's solitude was perhaps the most surprising: his capacity for solitary celebration. Where others might see loneliness in his isolated existence, Michael had discovered joy in private rituals and personal traditions that belonged entirely to him. Every Sunday morning, he baked fresh bread, not because he needed it, but because the process brought him pleasure. The mixing of ingredients, the kneading of dough, the patient waiting for the rise, the satisfaction of pulling golden loaves from his wood-fired oven. All of this had become a celebration of his own company and capabilities. He would eat the warm bread with butter churned from cream he bought from a farmer who lived miles inland, and the simple meal became a feast in its richness and intention. On clear evenings, when the sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Michael would pour himself a glass of wine and step out onto his small deck. There, facing the endless expanse of ocean, he would raise his glass in a toast, sometimes to the day that was ending, sometimes to his late wife, whose memory still brought him comfort, sometimes simply to the beauty of being alive in such a magnificent place. His birthday each year had become not a reminder of loneliness, but an opportunity for the most personal of celebrations. On that day, he would sail his skiff to a hidden cove that could only be reached at low tide, carrying a packed lunch and a bottle of champagne. In that secret place, surrounded by towering cliffs and accessible only to someone willing to navigate treacherous waters alone, he would spend the day in perfect solitude, reflecting on the year past and the year ahead. These solitary celebrations had taught Michael something profound about the nature of joy itself. Happiness didn't require an audience, appreciation didn't need witnesses, and celebration didn't depend on other people's participation. In learning to truly enjoy his own company, he had discovered a source of contentment that no external circumstance could threaten or diminish. The sixth and perhaps most significant strength that had emerged from Michael's chosen solitude was his ability to create a meaningful legacy through his art. Though he had never sought recognition or fame for his sculptures, they had begun to appear throughout the coastal community in ways that touched people's lives without him ever needing to step into the spotlight. The first piece had appeared on a bench outside the village post office, a small carving of a lighthouse that captured something essential about the spirit of their coastal community. No one knew who had left it there, but it quickly became a beloved landmark. Soon after, another sculpture appeared in the harbor, this one depicting a fishing boat riding the waves. Then another at the entrance to the village cemetery, a serene carving of a seagull in flight. Michael would make these anonymous gifts during his rare trips to town for supplies. He would leave them quietly, without fanfare or explanation, and then return to his clifftop sanctuary. The sculptures spoke for themselves, conveying messages of beauty, connection to the sea, and respect for the maritime heritage that defined the community. What made these gifts particularly powerful was their anonymity. Without knowing who created them, people were free to appreciate the art purely for what it represented rather than for who made it. The sculptures became part of the community's shared experience, sparking conversations, bringing comfort to those who discovered them, and creating connections between neighbors who might otherwise have remained strangers. This legacy through creation represented something profound about how meaning can be made in solitude. Michael's art had impact far beyond what he might have achieved through direct social interaction. His sculptures spoke when he chose silence, connected people when he chose solitude, and brought beauty into the world without requiring him to sacrifice the peaceful existence he had chosen for himself. As evening approached and Michael sat in his workshop putting finishing touches on his latest creation, the profound wisdom of his chosen path became clear. Solitude had not diminished him, it had refined him. It had not isolated him from life. It had connected him more deeply to what truly mattered. Each of the strengths he had developed through his years alone had contributed to a life of remarkable richness and purpose. His precision craftsmanship had evolved from functional skill to artistic expression. His meditative routines had created unshakable inner peace. His environmental attunement had made him part of the natural world rather than separate from it. His self-reliance had given him confidence and competence that no external validation could match. His solitary celebrations had taught him that joy belongs to those who create it for themselves. And his legacy through anonymous creation had shown him that impact doesn't require recognition. Take a moment to subscribe to our channel if you're finding wisdom in these stories of aging with purpose and authenticity. Michael's story reveals something profound about the potential that exists in choosing solitude not as a last resort, but as a deliberate path to fulfillment. His transformation from a conventional working life to this extraordinary existence on the clifftop demonstrates that our later years can be not just a time of maintenance and decline, but of discovery and growth in entirely new directions. To help you see this more clearly, I want to tell you another story that captures different aspects of this same profound truth. Across the ocean, in a quiet farming town, nestled among rolling hills and ancient hedgerows, two remarkable individuals had also discovered the transformative power of chosen solitude. Though they lived in the same small community, their paths rarely crossed. Yet both had found ways to flourish in their chosen isolation that would challenge everything you might think you know about living alone. Lucinda, at 82, lived in a stone cottage that seemed to have grown from the earth itself. The walls, thick and weathered, had sheltered generations before her, but now they contained something entirely unique, a life dedicated to the cultivation of both plants and wisdom. Behind her cottage stretched a garden that defied the common notion of what an elderly person could maintain alone. Row upon row of herbs grew in carefully planned succession, each plant chosen not just for beauty, but for purpose. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as Lucinda moved among her drying herbs, checking the bundles that hung from every available beam and hook. Chamomile, lavender, echinacea, calendula. Each plant represented years of accumulated knowledge about healing and wellness. This was no hobby garden tended by someone looking for ways to pass time. This was the workshop of someone who had discovered that solitude could become a laboratory for practical wisdom. Lucinda's first strength, developed through decades of living alone, was this practical wisdom that had evolved far beyond her original training as a midwife. During her working years, she had learned to trust natural remedies alongside modern medicine, often mixing tinctures and teas for new mothers and their families. Now, in retirement, she had the time and space to delve deeper into this knowledge, to experiment and refine her understanding of herbal medicine in ways that her busy professional life had never allowed. Her cottage had become a repository of knowledge that extended far beyond simple remedies. Shelves lined with carefully labeled jars contained not just dried herbs, but detailed notes about harvesting times, preparation methods, and the specific conditions each plant required. She had developed systems for tracking the effectiveness of different combinations, noting which preparations worked best for which ailments, and how factors like weather and soil conditions affected potency. What made Lucinda's practical wisdom particularly remarkable was how she had learned to apply this knowledge not just to physical healing, but to the art of living well in solitude. She had developed herbal preparations that supported mental clarity, emotional balance, and physical vitality, creating for herself a comprehensive approach to aging that relied on her own knowledge and capabilities rather than external medical intervention. The requests for her herbal preparations came quietly through word of mouth in the small farming community. A farmer's wife dealing with sleepless nights would find a small jar of her sleep blend left on her doorstep. An elderly man struggling with joint pain would discover a carefully prepared salve in his mailbox. Lucinda never sought payment or recognition for these gifts, but she responded to genuine need with the same quiet competence that had defined her midwifery practice. This practical wisdom had given Lucinda something invaluable: the confidence that comes from knowing you possess knowledge that can genuinely help others, combined with the discretion to share that knowledge on your own terms. She had become a keeper of traditional healing arts, maintaining and developing skills that might otherwise be lost in an increasingly medicalized world. The second strength that solitude had cultivated in Lucinda was her remarkable emotional equilibrium. Living alone for nearly 2 decades had taught her to navigate the full spectrum of human emotions without relying on others for validation or comfort. This wasn't emotional numbness or withdrawal, quite the opposite. It was the development of an internal emotional regulation system that allowed her to experience feelings fully while maintaining her balance and perspective. During the long winter months, when the garden lay dormant and social interaction became even more limited, Lucinda had learned to recognize the early signs of loneliness or melancholy and respond to them with the same systematic approach she brought to her herbal preparations. She had developed routines that supported emotional wellness: morning meditation with her tea, evening journaling by the fire, regular correspondence with distant friends and relatives. What made her emotional equilibrium particularly impressive was how she had learned to find joy in the smallest details of solitary life. The unfurling of the first spring crocus in her garden could lift her spirits for days. The successful preparation of a particularly challenging herbal remedy filled her with satisfaction that needed no external validation. The quiet pleasure of a well-organized workspace, the comfort of familiar routines, the deep peace of evening solitude, all of these had become sources of genuine contentment. This emotional stability had also allowed Lucinda to maintain perspective during the inevitable challenges of aging. When arthritis began to affect her hands, she adapted her gardening techniques rather than abandoning her passion. When her eyesight started to decline, she reorganized her workspace and developed new systems for identifying herbs by touch and smell. Each challenge became an opportunity to demonstrate to herself that she possessed the emotional resources to adapt and continue thriving. Lucinda's third strength, born from her years of thoughtful solitude, was her dedication to the preservation of tradition. As one of the last midwives trained in the old ways, she had become acutely aware that much of what she knew would die with her unless she took deliberate action to preserve it. Her cottage had become an archive of knowledge that extended far beyond herbal medicine into the realm of cultural history and traditional practices. In the evenings, by the light of her oil lamp, Lucinda would write in careful script, documenting not just recipes and remedies, but the stories and folklore that surrounded them. She recorded the traditional birthing practices that had been passed down through generations of midwives, the seasonal celebrations that marked agricultural cycles, the old songs that women had sung while working in their gardens. Each entry was carefully dated and cross-referenced, creating a comprehensive record of ways of life that were rapidly disappearing. What made this preservation work particularly meaningful was how Lucinda had begun to share selected portions of her archive with younger members of the community. A young mother interested in natural childbirth would receive copied pages about traditional birthing positions and comfort measures. An aspiring herbalist would find detailed notes about plant identification and harvesting techniques. Through these careful selections, Lucinda was ensuring that essential knowledge would continue to live and grow rather than simply gather dust in her cottage. This preservation of tradition had given Lucinda a profound sense of purpose that transcended her individual existence, she had become a bridge between past and future, ensuring that wisdom accumulated over centuries would not be lost to the convenience of modern life. Her solitary work was creating a legacy that would benefit generations she would never meet. People who would learn from her careful documentation long after she was gone. Meanwhile, on the far side of the same village, Halston inhabited a world of entirely different sensory experience. His converted barn, with its high ceilings and excellent acoustics, had become a sanctuary for someone whose relationship with sound had evolved far beyond the ordinary. At 80 years old, Halston possessed what could only be described as sensory mastery, an ability to perceive and appreciate auditory nuances that most people never notice. Halston's fourth strength, developed through decades of piano tuning and refined through years of solitary living, was this extraordinary sensitivity to sound. During his working years, his ears had been trained to detect the slightest variations in pitch, the subtle differences that distinguish a perfectly tuned instrument from one that was even fractionally off. Now, in retirement, this same sensitivity had expanded to encompass the entire auditory landscape of his rural environment. Each morning, as Halston stepped out of his barn for his daily walk, he would pause and listen with the concentration of a conductor preparing for a performance. The sound of wind moving through different types of trees, the whisper of pine needles, the rustle of oak leaves, the creaking of old wood, each had its own distinct voice that spoke to him of weather conditions, seasonal changes, and the health of the woodland ecosystem. His daily walks through the countryside had become exercises in auditory exploration. Halston could identify birds not just by their songs, but by the subtle variations in their calls that indicated mood, season, and social interaction. He had learned to read the landscape through sound, the distant lowing of cattle that spoke of contentment, the particular buzz of insects that indicated the health of flower meadows, the almost imperceptible sounds of small creatures moving through undergrowth. This sensory mastery had given Halston something remarkable, a rich, complex relationship with his environment that existed entirely through listening. Where others might see empty countryside, he experienced a symphony of natural sounds that provided constant entertainment, information, and connection to the living world around him. What made Halston's auditory sensitivity particularly profound was how it had taught him to appreciate silence itself. True silence, he had discovered, was incredibly rare. What most people considered quiet was actually filled with layers of subtle sound that revealed themselves only to someone who had learned to listen with complete attention. The different qualities of silence, the expectant hush before dawn, the drowsy quiet of midday, the settling peace of evening, each had its own character and meaning. The fifth and final strength that both Lucinda and Halston exemplified, though in different ways, was intentional simplicity. For Halston, this principle had become the organizing philosophy of his entire existence. His converted barn contained only what he truly needed and genuinely valued: a piano in one corner, a comfortable armchair positioned to catch the morning light, a simple bed, basic cooking facilities, and shelves lined with books about music, nature, and philosophy. This wasn't the simplicity of poverty or deprivation, but the elegant minimalism of someone who had learned to distinguish between what added value to his life and what merely created clutter and distraction. Every object in Halston's living space had been chosen deliberately, kept because it served a genuine purpose or brought him authentic pleasure. His piano, maintained in perfect condition despite its age, represented not just an instrument, but a connection to his life's work and a source of ongoing creative expression. Halston's daily routines reflected this same intentional simplicity. He woke with the dawn, made simple but nourishing meals, spent hours listening to the world around him, played piano when the mood struck him, read extensively, and retired early. There were no complicated schedules, no unnecessary obligations, no activities that didn't align with his core values and interests. This lifestyle had taught Holston something profound about the relationship between simplicity and satisfaction. By eliminating everything that didn't truly matter to him, he had created space for deep appreciation of what remained. His morning tea became a moment of genuine mindfulness. His evening piano practice became a form of meditation. His daily walks became opportunities for profound connection with the natural world. The intentional simplicity that both Lucinda and Holston had achieved in their different ways represented something revolutionary about aging in modern society. While conventional, wisdom suggested that later life should be filled with activities, social obligations, and constant stimulation. They had discovered that true fulfillment came from the opposite direction, from carefully curating their experiences to include only what genuinely nourished their spirits, what made their parallel but separate existences particularly instructive was how they demonstrated that there is no single correct way to embrace solitude in later life. Lucinda's path led through practical wisdom and the preservation of traditional knowledge. Holston's journey focused on sensory refinement and aesthetic simplicity. Yet both had discovered strengths that would have been impossible to develop in more conventional social settings. Their stories reveal something essential about the nature of chosen solitude. It's not about withdrawing from life, but about engaging with it more selectively and intensively. Both Lucinda and Holston had found ways to contribute meaningfully to their community while maintaining the solitary lifestyle that nourished their individual growth and development. As evening settled over the farming village, with Lucinda tending her herbs by lamplight and Holston listening to the night sounds from his armchair, their separate but parallel journeys illustrated the remarkable diversity of ways that solitude can become a source of strength, wisdom, and deep satisfaction in the later years of life. If you're finding value in these perspectives on aging with intention and authenticity, please like this video to help others discover these important insights. The contrast between Michael's coastal solitude and the rural isolation chosen by Lucinda and Holston reveals something profound about the adaptability of the human spirit in later life. Each had found their own unique way to transform what society often views as limitation into liberation, loneliness into purposeful solitude, and withdrawal into a different form of engagement with life itself. These remarkable individuals have shown us that there are 11 unique strengths that can emerge when seniors choose solitude not as a last resort, but as a deliberate path to fulfillment and growth. Through Michael's story, we witnessed the power of precision craftsmanship, where freedom from external pressures allowed his hands to create art that spoke directly to the soul. His meditative routine of morning rows taught us that repetitive, mindful actions can become gateways to inner peace and mental clarity. His environmental attunement demonstrated how solitude can sharpen our sensitivity to natural cycles and rhythms that most people never notice. Michael also embodied the strength of complete self-reliance, showing us that independence isn't just about managing daily tasks, but about developing the confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever challenges arise. His capacity for solitary celebration revealed that joy doesn't require an audience, that the deepest forms of happiness come from learning to truly appreciate your own company. Perhaps most remarkably, his legacy through creation showed us how anonymous gifts of beauty can impact a community far more powerfully than any form of public recognition. From Lucinda and Holston's parallel journeys, we discovered 5 additional strengths that solitude can cultivate. Lucinda's practical wisdom demonstrated how living alone provides the space and time necessary to develop deep expertise. to become a keeper of knowledge that might otherwise be lost. Her emotional equilibrium showed us that solitude can teach us to navigate our feelings with grace and stability, finding contentment in the smallest details of daily life. Lucinda's dedication to preservation of tradition revealed how our later years can become a time of cultural contribution, ensuring that valuable knowledge and practices survive for future generations. Holston's sensory mastery illustrated how solitude can refine our perception, allowing us to experience richness and complexity in what others might dismiss as emptiness or silence. Finally, both Lucinda and Holston exemplified intentional simplicity, showing us that true satisfaction comes not from accumulating more, but from carefully choosing what truly matters. These 11 strengths, precision craftsmanship, meditative routine, environmental attunement, self-reliance, solitary celebration, legacy through creation, practical wisdom, emotional equilibrium, preservation of tradition, sensory mastery, and intentional simplicity represent a complete reimagining of what it means to age with dignity and purpose. They challenge every assumption our society makes about the necessity of constant social interaction and the tragedy of living alone. What makes these strengths particularly powerful is that they're not dependent on circumstances beyond your control. You don't need perfect health, unlimited resources, or ideal living conditions to begin developing them. They emerge from choices you can make right now, regardless of your current situation. Whether you're already living alone or simply seeking to appreciate the value of solitude in your daily life, these principles can transform your relationship with yourself and your understanding of what's possible in your later years. The question now is not whether these strengths are real or achievable. The stories of Michael, Lucinda, and Holston have proven that they are. The question is whether you're ready to challenge the conventional wisdom that tells you solitude is something to be feared or pitied. Are you willing to consider that your greatest growth and most meaningful contributions might still lie ahead, waiting to be discovered in the peaceful space of your own company? How will you begin to cultivate these strengths in your own life? Will you experiment with meditative routines that bring you inner peace? Will you develop practical skills that increase your self-reliance and confidence? Will you find ways to preserve and share the wisdom you've accumulated over your lifetime? Will you simplify your surroundings to focus on what truly brings you joy and meaning? The path forward requires courage. The courage to live according to your own values rather than society's expectations. The courage to find fulfillment in ways that others might not understand. The courage to embrace solitude as a source of strength rather than a sign of failure. But as these remarkable individuals have shown us, this courage leads not to isolation, but to a deeper form of connection with yourself, with your environment, with your purpose, and ultimately with the kind of life that reflects your truest values and deepest wisdom. Your later years don't have to be about decline, limitation, or settling for less. They can be about discovery, mastery, and the kind of authentic living that's only possible when you've learned to honor your own needs and follow your own path. The choice, as always, is entirely yours. If these stories and insights have inspired you to see solitude and aging in a new light, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more wisdom on living with purpose and authenticity.